Hi, welcome to my podcast, Reclaim. I am your host, Thaís Sky. I have supported women navigate the complexities of being human for over 10 years. This podcast is where I disseminate some of those learnings and offer thoughts and guests to guide you into your healing. Welcome. Hello, dear listeners. Thaís Sky here. Welcome to Reclaim the podcast. I'm happy to be here. I have a really special interview with Natalie Brite here for all of you today. It was such a brilliant conversation. Natalie focuses on creating ethical businesses, and her wisdom is just so profound. I can't wait to get into that episode or into that interview. But first, I have kind of exciting news. This past weekend was my business-versary. It was my business anniversary. It marked 6 years that I've been in business full time. To know a little bit about my story, if you don't know, in 2011, I started my certification program at the Institute of Integrative Nutrition to become a health coach. And that started my entrepreneurial story, but it was part-time. I was building it on the side. I was working in corporate. I was working at Lululemon. I was working in all sorts of ways to make money while I was figuring out what I wanted to do. I also did a yoga teacher certification program. I started teaching yoga and doing health coaching on the side. Very quickly, that health coaching shifted to life coaching. Because to be frank, I really didn't want to talk to people about kale. Love kale. Didn't really want to spend a whole coaching session talking about it. And that began this incredible journey that I have been on. And then in 2015, I decided I was going to quit my full-time job, drive across country, move to Los Angeles to be with my partner at the time, and start my business full-time. That means make no money in any other way except in my business. That was my intention at the time. It was June of 2015. June 5th, actually, was the day that I left my home. I was living with my parents at the time after moving out, moving in, the struggles of your 20s. And wow, what a journey it has been. 6 years of full-time entrepreneurship. I've been making money in this business for 6 years. There's something particularly courageous and brave in creating a job for yourself that hasn't really been done yet, right? To create your brand of magic. I didn't have a degree to support my work. Life coaching is not accredited. You can do certifications, but it doesn't really do much. You have to have a lot of passion. And I had gumption, right? And a skill set and a deep knowing that this is what I was meant to be doing, that I was meant to be in service in this way. And it's terrifying. It's terrifying. And so if you're a coach, whether it's part-time or full-time, there is no judgment. It's smart, really, to stay in making money until you feel like you can be sustainable in your business. I don't think I did it right, to be honest. I had a lot of panic attacks when I did it because I didn't have the financial capacities yet to be on my own when I quit my job all those years ago. Wow. So 6 years. I've obviously shared on this podcast so many episodes about business and entrepreneurship, and I'm going to link them into the show notes. For example, episode 143, I talked about coaching with integrity with Julie Parker. That was a phenomenal conversation. As someone who's been a coach for 19 years, here I was thinking wow, I've been in the coaching industry for 10 years? She's been in it for 19 years. Julie is incredible and shared wonderful stories about her experience of coaching with integrity. So you can go check that out. That's episode 143. I did an episode 135, myths about building a coaching business, narratives that are pushed in the coaching industry and about how to build a business and how I navigated them. Because I didn't make 6 figures in my first year. I didn't make 6 figures in my second year. In fact, I really scrapped for money for a long time before I built something that has felt really sustainable and has hit the 6-figure mark and has felt really in the image of what I had wanted for my business. It took time for me to build that. I'm not an instant success. So I shared some of my myths, or some of the myths and how I overcame them and navigated them in episode 135. And I'll also link episode 97 for you, where I called it the entrepreneur episode. And I talk about some of my really painful mistakes and lessons that I've made along the way of entrepreneurship. So you can go to the show notes to listen to all of those. Entrepreneurship is hard. Entrepreneurship requires us to dig deep. And I see it in my mentor group, my mentorship that I offer for coaches who are wanting to do deep ethical work. It's really wonderful to see them really grapple with things that don't have easy answers. Being an entrepreneur, putting yourself out there, building a business based on your own passion, cultivating skill set, this is not the easy road. And I applaud all of you, coaches, healers, teachers who are making it on your own, boldly creating something you've never seen before. I applaud you. I bow to you. I celebrate you, and my message always is to keep going. I didn't think my business was going to succeed until year 4. Year 4, full-time. Year 4, full-time. I didn't really think my business was going to succeed. I scrapped. I scrimped. I stressed. I was so overwhelmed. So many people told me, Thaís, just get a part-time job. Thaís, just get something. And there's nothing wrong with getting a part-time job. I'm not saying that if you decide to do that it means it's a weakness or something. It's certainly not. The way I chose to go down the route was to get my master's. There's nothing wrong with getting support where you get them. But I just knew that wasn't right for me yet. Not out of a lack of trying. I remember even going and getting an application at Lululemon to go back and work there. I thought it'd be perfect for me to go back and work at Lululemon part-time. I applied, I did an interview, and they rejected me, even though I've worked there before. It was devastating. And it was a sign that I'm not meant to, well, I took it at the time as a sign of I'm not meant to make money elsewhere. I'm meant to make this work. It was not easy. I went into a lot of debt, but it was what I needed to do. It's not what everyone needs to do, but it's what I needed to do. This stuff isn't easy. So keep going. Even if you don't see the results yet, keep going day by day by day. Things will come together. Yes? Okay. So let me read to you Natalie Brite's bio so I can bring her on. Natalie Brite is an educator, mentor, writer, and consultant for the topics of ethical business ideation, branding, content marketing, service development, and social leadership. Natalie is the founder of the Align and Flow membership, host of the Wildly Aligned podcast, and has worked with people and organizations from all over the world, supporting them develop an ethical business model. You can learn more by going to Natalie Brite, that's BRITE.com. I love following Natalie on Instagram. She offers so much important resources and guidance on building ethical brands and ethical businesses. And I really value what she offers us today on the podcast. So I'm going to do a little music and then we're going to bring her on. And I look forward to hearing how this episode resonates with you. Go follow me at I am Thaís Guy on Instagram. Say hi, share the podcast, leave a review. You know the whole spiel. It really does help the algorithms. I know it's wild and crazy and silly, but it does. And I appreciate every single one of you who have left a review, who have shared the podcast. It means the fucking world to me. I've been doing this podcast for, 2-3 years now? And it's still very much a one-woman show here. It's just me. I record. I did have a producer for a little while, but I ended up deciding that, I want my tentacles, I want my hands on my baby. And so I'm back to doing all the editing. It's a small production here, and every review, every comment you leave really goes so far in supporting the energy of this podcast. Okay? All right, let's go. It is so fancy, the new Zoom. It does recording in progress.
I know.
I love it. Well, hello, Natalie. Welcome to Reclaim the podcast. It's such a treat to have you here.
Thank you for having me.
I have been such a big admirer of your work. And anytime anyone comes into my vicinity, into my world, and they're talking about ethics and coaching, I'm like, oh, you obviously have to follow Natalie Brite. Like, you're just like that person, like that go-to person in my mind of like, I'm just in such awe and have so much respect for the language, the way you think about and articulate and help others think about their coaching business as a part of a larger constellation of ethics and how we may orient and change the world through our work and through this field. And so I'm really excited to get the chance to kind of dive into your mind and talk more about it. But first, for people who may not be as familiar with you, I would love to hear just a little bit of a history of like, how did you kind of get into this work? What path took you to where you are now?
Yeah, it's kind of funny because even sharing like my past up until now, I don't think until even this year, I actually really understood why I did what I did in the past.
Mm-hmm.
And so like, it's just now starting to make sense of why things took me a certain way. So I actually started off, I went to university I studied art and philosophy. And so I was kind of in two worlds of more of the like ethics and philosophies and sociology and all of that realm. But then I was also in the art realm, design, creativity, all of that. And that kind of, I didn't really know what to do with it. It was kind of like, I love these things, but I don't know what to do with it.
That sounds about right for someone studying philosophy.
Yeah.
Like, this is great, but now what?
What? Yeah. And everybody thought it was, very, what are you doing for studying that kind of stuff? And I didn't really know either. So after, I went through school and then I went back to school for cosmetology, spent some time working in spas in the wellness space and stuff like that. Wasn't my thing either. And then I started getting immersed in like some community spaces online. And this, I'm talking, this was like a decade ago, right? And so very different online space back then. And I found really incredible communities and just started meeting amazing people from all over the place. And I started getting exposed to people building businesses online and doing, coaching and service providing and this and that. And it kind of like planted a little seed of idea in my head that never existed. I never thought about ever working for myself. It wasn't even like an option. I never thought that could be a thing. And so long story short, went on, got, coaching certified and started pursuing the avenue of, I kind of started out more in like life coaching and business coaching, but within like, I would say 6 months of coaching, I went full blown into business because I was able to kind of mesh a lot of my passions into one space. But I got really obsessed with working with entrepreneurs and people that had really wild ideas, so that's kind of the background. And then just over the years, in came some of the stuff I studied in school of realizing that a lot of my approach was not how many business coaches were doing it. And that I started seeing a massive gap of just this weird obsession with metrics and profit and this and that. And it just felt really, I was like kind of dumbfounded by it. And so I started bringing in a lot of my philosophy background and ethics background and design background into what I do. And it's just kind of morphed over the years and kept building my educational background. I just finished a DEI in the workplace cert, and I'm now getting ready to start a sustainability and development certification. So just kind of expanding from there and see where it takes me.
It is interesting how surprising it can be to realize how much of entrepreneurialism is grounded in numbers and results and profit first. And I think people, when I communicate to people out in the greater world that, I'm an entrepreneur of some kind, I think what often gets elicited is this idea like I'm a Mark Cuban, right? Or that my entire mode of operandus, whatever the Latin phrase is, my entire way of being is oriented around money. And I see the ramifications of that in the coaching industry and what it looks like. And I think it can be really disheartening when you first start looking at the industry as a whole and seeing just how oriented it is towards being successful, making six figures, that if you become a coach, it's going to be quite easy, for you to make six figures as long as you have the right mindset and the right systems in place. Yep. And your message is such a stark contrast from that. And it feels sometimes like a fresh air, just like, oh, thank God there's somebody talking about this. But I also imagine that it may feel kind of lonely, or it may feel like you're doing something really revolutionary.
It's a very interesting thing because, I mean, I won't kid anybody. There have been plenty of times that I got completely sucked into that mentality, like many times where I had to like pull myself out of the hole over and over. I feel like almost like every year I've been in business now for 7+ years. And every year I've had a moment of like, oh, I lost myself again, because it's just so easy to get sucked into stuff. And it's heartbreaking sometimes, honestly, especially the one thing is like collaborating and stuff like that. And wow, are we so capable of portraying ourselves in certain lights online? And I think that's always the most heartbreaking part, is when you have a connection with somebody and build a relationship, and then you kind of that like curtain gets pulled back and it's like, that's not who I thought that was, and I think that's the hardest part, is just kind of, I constantly crave real connection. And then when we realize that that's so easy to fake, that can be very challenging.
Yes. And it's part of the, I think, marketing narrative that we have to create these relationships by going into people's DMs, by commenting. You have cold calling, right? Like messaging people out of the blue and saying, hey, it looks like you're interested in this. You may also be interested in this. And it's very surprising when you think, oh, I thought we were developing this kind of grounded relationship, and turns out you were just looking at me as a potential client, as someone that would give you money.
Yeah. I talk to my partner often about like certain kind of, norms and things that happen in specifically like the online business space, because he's not on social media at all. Like, not at all. And he's always just like so shocked that things like that too. Because we were just actually having a conversation yesterday about like using DMs to make sales, and like only like basically closing sales all in DMs, like on Instagram. Sure. And that's like your only way. And he was shocked that people run their businesses through Instagram DMs, like stuff like that. And it's just really interesting, especially thinking about it from like a consumer or customer's standpoint, and how that feels. It's a bizarre time to be in business when it's online.
Yeah, I've seen plenty of coaches tout quite proudly that they can make sales without sales pages. And I think on the one hand, you should, that is impressive, right? To be able to sell a multiple grand, like $5,000 coaching program, that's quite impressive. But is it the type of impressive that we should be proud of? Because it's a little, I don't know, confusing, alarming that people are so excited by the fantasy of what you sell them that they don't even need to really orient themselves around the details and to really think about it. Because if they really thought about it, they probably wouldn't make such a it relies on spontaneity and impulsivity and emotions. And is that ethical? Is that how we want people to be making purchasing decisions into our programs?
That's a very powerful question right there, because it is like thinking about that process and like the, whatever you want to call it, onboarding process or sales process or anything. It's like, and is that sustainable? Like, do you want to be on Instagram DMs like through your whole career selling? I don't, like, no way.
Mhm.
So it's like thinking about it from that perspective too, of like, is this something that is of the best interest of everybody? Like, what is the cost versus the benefit of doing it that way?
Mhm. You're right. I think you're speaking to a way in which people orient themselves around their business, which is making money and not really thinking about the sustainability of it, the longevity of it, and creating something that can be more sustainable throughout the ages. I think it can be very easy to fall into this fear induced place of, but I just need to make money now.
Yeah. Yeah. And a lot like what you were saying too, with like the urgency and the quickness and all of that kind of stuff, that obsession with like now, and
Yeah.
just, I think the sales process and any way that we purchase, whether it's business related or otherwise, that space we're in when we purchase really needs to be thought out, of what kind of atmosphere we're creating for individuals before they even have a product or a service in hand, and like, what is their state of being when they come into working with you in some capacity?
Mm,
Are they terrified? Are they feeling broken because you made them feel like they were like super messed up and they needed your stuff to get fixed, like that kind of
mhm.
stuff, of like, or do they feel empowered and excited and hopeful? Like, really thinking about that state, I think is really transformational.
Yeah, I never really thought it that way, and I couldn't agree more. I, of course, yeah, my audience knows this, but I'll iterate for anyone who's new here, is that I speak about these tactics that I no longer support from a place of having done them.
Yep.
Like, yep, I've done all of it. Maybe not gone into DMs and cold sell. I've done that. I
Oh,
have
I've done
always
it.
had a sales page that I've always had, but at the time, I was very envious of people who didn't have to have sales pages. So I think it's important to orient people who are listening to this truth that Natalie and I have both been there and done
Oh
this.
yeah.
And it's not that we were bad people then and now we're good people. It's not, I don't think of myself as superior in any way. It's just, I'm grateful to have had people like Natalie in the world who could help me think about things differently and think about a different way of doing business, that there isn't that just that way, that there is other ways that we could do business that can actually feel sustainable and ethical and long term, can really guide us through the aging of our psyche.
Yep. Yeah. And like really thinking too about that, because I've done it all. I've been there, done it with pretty much any strategy out there. And the one thing that really helped me realize that, like, not only are there other ways, those ways are so much more nurturing for us,
Yeah.
is anytime I take time off social media, anytime I do that and I step away and I realize I don't need to be glued to my social media to have a successful business and help
Yeah.
people. That's
Yeah.
always an eye opener, because then it's like, oh, there are ways that we can grow that is long lasting, but also it just makes our systems feel so much better. And we're not
Mhm.
grinding to the bone and missing out on conversations with people we love and being present with our lives because we're glued. It's like,
Right.
just, it's a reclaiming a lot, I think, of ourselves and how we want to treat other people.
Yes. I could not agree more. And I'm in this interesting position now this year, 2021, where I am not launching anything. So I have my one-on-one work, which right now has a wait list. I have my mentorship, which now has a wait list. And um, the big thing that I launch every year, my group program, Worthy Women Rise, I'm not launching this year. I'm completing my year-long group, and then I'm going to take a pause, and then I'm going to relaunch a 5 month and a year-long in 2022. All of that to say, a whole year of not launching. And this is the first time since I started my business in 2010 that I'm not launched something. And it's been really interesting to, just like what you said, to think about, oh, can my business continue to sustain me income wise, energy wise, etc., if I'm not constantly pouring out and launching and pushing and growing my numbers, growing my lists, growing my followers? Like, like how can I relate to my business in a way that it can be mutually supportive?
That's everything. It's everything. That was actually one of my intentions I set at the beginning of this year was I'm not growing. That it's a maintenance year. Like, let's just chill and tend to things and kind of like shift into other things. And it's really weird how it's like, I don't know if you've experienced this, but I've had days where I'm like, I feel weird that I don't have anything I need to be doing. And I don't have a push I have to be focused on and this and that. And it's literally like training yourself to feel comfortable with not being constantly in motion.
Yes. Well, I make up arbitrary. There's such a void of it that I make up arbitrary numbers. Like I'm not launching anything, but I'm going to grow my social media by this number. And then I have to back up and think, but why? Why do I need to do that? It's so ingrained in me to be constantly pushing, and my husband all the time will be like, Thaís, you have done the work. You can spend a year reaping the benefits of that work. But I'm terrified that it's going to dry up. I'm terrified that I'm going to get to a point where no one's going to care about me anymore, that I'm going to be forgotten. And that makes me wonder how much of my business has been actually a way that I'm trying to feel significant rather than a service. I mean, and it can be both, but let's think about, how much of it is service and how much of it is this really scary, shadowy part of myself.
Oh, totally. Totally. I question that all the time. Because it's like this, like, who are you if you're not in that work and doing that work, and it's like, it's a weird kind of like this attachment identity type of thing. And that fear of it ending, like I've battled that fear so many times of just this like pure terror of, if I stop, it all stops. And then what, and then especially when you like blood, sweat and tears, it's like, oh my gosh, all that work and it could go away,
That's right.
It's a lot. It's a lot.
And I think that that's what maybe drives us sometimes into doing things that maybe we can look back on and think, oh, I don't know if that was the most ethical thing. It is that fear of being forgotten, of not making enough, of having to prove ourselves. I think that can often drive us into things that I don't know if we would necessarily want to keep doing.
Totally. And I think that's a really important part right there, because especially thinking about like what fuels us to do ethical work versus what causes us not to. And I think that right there is a lot of it, of just kind of really getting real with what is actually driving you in the first place.
How would you define, I think we're using that word ethics a lot, and I'm curious of what your definition is. How do you conceptualize or think about this idea of an ethical business?
Yeah, I use a lot of different terms kind of interchangeably. Sometimes I'll call it conscious business. Sometimes I'll call it sustainable business. Kind of depends on what realm I'm feeling in the day. But at the end of the day, I think honestly for me, it's a lot about doing work that is of a broader purpose than just for yourself and your personal gains. So like sometimes it's called triple bottom line impact, where like your organization is centered on, you know, people, planet, and profit, or social responsibility driven, social responsibility to society and the impact or the environment. That's kind of the way I tend to look at it, is the work is about more than just us. It's about we as a collective, and it's about how our work impacts and ripples and supports society and the planet just as much as the individuals we work with and ourselves, right?
Well, let's say, well, I'm living my purpose, which is to help others. I do that by coaching them. Aren't I already then just inherently in that doing ethical work? I feel really good about it. My clients love me. Isn't that ethical, right? Like, isn't that
I would
a conscious
100%.
business?
I would say 100%, but from the storefront, yes. So a lot of times, especially in that realm of ethical business, we see this a lot in like corporate businesses, especially where from the front, everybody loves them, right? Everybody loves them. I'll use the example of Tom's shoes. From the front, everybody loves Tom's shoes. I've had pairs of Tom's shoes. They're known for doing incredible things for communities and so on and so forth. But behind the hood, it comes out that Tom's shoes, by implanting themselves in communities of need out, you know, different communities outside the US, and providing shoes to them and doing all this community service, they ended up taking away a ton of jobs for the local community, leaving tons of locals out of work and out of pay. And so like, from the front, they looked fantastic. Like they were doing great. Everybody loved them, but they were still causing harm. And so that's where a lot of, especially ethical business, it requires us to examine all of our actions and the ripple that makes, right? Of like, okay, so I'm doing great work. My clients love me. I'm having great success, but how is that rippling? How is my way in which, what do I do with my money? How is my money rippling and creating impact? How do I vote with my dollar? How do I support the community surrounding me? And, you know, so it's like getting more deeply involved in a sense of belonging to not just what we do on an individual level, but how we also belong to the whole, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I remember hearing a story about, I don't remember who the organization was, but the intent was to build schools for girls in places where there weren't enough schools for girls. And in those communities, girls didn't go to school. And this is, you know, we want women to be educated and empowered in the world. And so the mission is quite wonderful, right? To build, but the consequence of that led to the girls getting educated, but then having nowhere to go, having no job access, and so then having to go back home. So it didn't ultimately result in a greater community. It resulted in a helplessness, and then these girls would leave their communities, and then there was a whole. So it's just so interesting because I would never think that deeper. You know, I would think that, wow, yes, girls need to be in schools. It's I think the perspective of I need to go somewhere and I need to help and save them from themselves mentality, rather than working with the community and what they need and listening. And so it's interesting because I think in the coaching world, we stop at, well, I'm doing something good because I'm in service. And I think it's harder to examine the ways in which how we do that good thing matters. And then what we do after that matters. And every part of the business matters. It's not just that you're doing good because you're a coach. There are plenty of coaches who do harm because of how they do their business.
Yes, and that was another thing I thought just popped in my head regarding like specifically the coaching industry. There's so many different areas we could examine with that, but one that just popped in my mind was an example of like say there's a really successful, well-known rocking it coach, right? Everybody loves them. They're doing great work, have great clients, and so on. But then behind the scenes, you come to find out that they're underpaying their team, or not paying their team, or creating a really harmful exclusive environment in their group coaching settings, or silencing clients because their opinion shakes up their atmosphere they want to create, right? So it's like that's the one thing that's so tricky about what you see in the front and versus what's going on in the back. And I think luckily now it seems like we're more open than ever before to have these conversations, and I think it's important to be like, well, I've messed up, I've caused harm plenty of times, so let's talk about it. But there's still this like edge of people, I think, scared to talk about situations they've experienced or spaces they've been in, and the harm that's been caused, you know?
Yeah, sure. And I think that it can get really easy to not look at these things, you know? I mean, yeah, there's more conversations, there's kind of more attention being placed. And I think, what about the people who don't yet have a team, you know, who don't yet have a really large audience, you know? And it's easy to think, oh, that doesn't apply to me. You know, I'm not making a lot of money yet. I don't really have to be thinking about these things yet.
Yeah, I wish I would have. I'll say that much. I wish I would have. And the one thing too, especially nowadays, especially if you have like a community with any newer coaches or newer into business, this is such a valuable conversation to be having now, because I guarantee we'll see in the next couple years some much stronger regulations and codes of ethics coming in, where I feel like right now we're on kind of this, we're getting the momentum happening and we have the conversations happening, but it's a matter of time before it goes to a next level. So if you're new, what better time than at the beginning to set that foundation so that you can feel confident about how you're doing your work. And you also are setting a foundation for the clients that do flow in, and the people that do flow in, they're going to be supported in a really healthy way.
What do you imagine is going to happen in the next few years?
I have a feeling, especially with how unregulated everything is, I really doubt I doubt they'll enforce regulation to the extent of like every person has to be certified to practice coaching. Doubt that'll ever happen. But I do think there will be much more in terms of consumer feedback, to the point where it will crush your business, because we're seeing that already. We've seen that a lot with like canceling and call outs and stuff like that. I think at this point, it's more the consumers are voting big time right now.
Like the regulation will be oriented towards protecting consumers.
Yep, completely. So I think that's where it's going to become something that it's a non-negotiable. At least I cross my fingers that it will be.
Yeah. Well, in California, psychotherapists are regulated. Marriage and family therapists are regulated by a board of behavioral sciences. And, you know, we have to pass a law and ethics exam as well as a licensure exam. And the most important part of studying for the law and ethics exam is understanding that the board protects consumers, not therapists. That the board is created to protect consumers from therapists and from therapists doing harm. And I think that that's really interesting that you say that, because I imagine that's also the direction that the industry is going to go in, where consumers are going to have more power in being able, because right now I've heard so many stories of coaches who charge $10,000 for 5 months. You pay up front because it gives you a huge discount to do that. And then 2 months in, a month in, you realize it's not a good fit and you can't get your money back. And there's all sorts of ways that the coach makes it sound like it's your fault. Well, you should have completed it. And there's no other industry that really operates that way. If you don't deliver, you can't charge the money. Yep. There's some places where they do non-refundable deposits. I understand that, but for the most part, that's also very regulated, and there's ways around it, and there's not in the coaching industry. And I think that that's really dangerous.
Yep. Yeah. It's really, and that's where that always really scares me when I hear stories like that, especially like stories of paying all this money and then you get like nothing what you thought. And income's like what you were talking about with the sales page thing of like, that's why we need sales pages, so that we actually can hold ourselves accountable of like, are you being transparent with what I'm actually signing up for? And also from the consumer standpoint, like we need to realize that we have power to be able to say like, I need more specifics here. Yes. I need to understand what I'm going to get with this cost, and really like exercising that power. And if the service provider isn't open to that or takes offense to that, there's your answer right there, you know?
Right. Yeah. I'm even thinking about contracts, how contracts are really created, which I think is across the board. I think that this is what contracts are supposed to do. They protect the coach, not the consumer. And so I get that this is not just about the coach industry, but legal things in general. But still, it just does make me wonder. We're asking our clients to sign these long contracts that basically is like, you cannot charge, you are indebted to me. Like, you are responsible for paying forever. And if you have a problem with it, tough luck. And it's not a great way to do business if that's how you're running your business. Again, not saying anything about contracts in general, but just this idea, the energy of the contract, I guess, is more along the lines of what I'm thinking about.
Yeah. And that just made me think about like a cool idea of like, why not create some like consumer contracts of like, and here's how you'll be protected. Here is my promise to you, and this is how I uphold my end of the deal.
Right.
That would be a nice little switch.
Yes, it would. I am working on revamping my contracts now, but it has historically been, this is what I expect of you. This is what you can expect of me. And I think that it's a great place to start. I mean, these things need to be communicated and talked about. It's not just in the contract, but a place that says, I will be on time. I will cancel as much as possible before a certain amount of time, right? Like, I respect your time just as much as I'm inviting you to respect mine. Because it's a relationship that we're entering into, and that requires both a give and a take.
Mm-hmm. And especially thinking about that, this gets me wanting to like revamp my onboarding structures, because like even thinking about that relationship of starting with somebody and it's that vulnerable kind of, you're a little nervous to get going. And then if it's an environment where it's this mutually beneficial and everybody's kind of accountable and on the same page, rather than this like hierarchical, I'm the boss and here's my contract and you better agree or else, like it shifts the entire dynamic of that relationship. And then you start on this level playing field of respect. Right. That's a huge change.
It's a huge change, and it gives the consumer power too. I
Yep.
mean, at any point, of course, we can say, you know what, this isn't going to work. But I'm not talking about just leaving. I'm talking about the power to enter a dialogue and understanding, to feel like it's a mutually agreed upon relationship and not just one that you have to be okay with if you want to work with this person.
Yep. Yep.
And I also think the place that doesn't get enough attention that makes me really sad is the termination, is the ending. I remember working with a coach who, oh my gosh, I adored her. I thought she was wonderful. I was so excited to work with her, and I got everything I wanted out of it. She did not, you know, I was not disappointed or dissatisfied. Like, I felt like the thing that we did together was really wonderful. But I went in, you know, she had kind of an open ended. So whenever you're ready to end, you let me know. And I had it in my mind that it was going to be a 3-month relationship because that's how much I could afford at the time. Like, it
Yep.
was really, at the end of the day, like, I wanted to invest more and for longer, and I couldn't. I was in, you know, we could argue about how committed I was if I wasn't willing to be in it forever. But at the time, in my mind, it was 3 months. And so when I told her at the end, like, this is going to be our final month, I've been really loving this, and I'm not going to be able to move forward, she cut me off. She was like, okay, we're done. I never got a goodbye session. Like, I wanted like a final session with her to end. You know, I wanted to give her a testimonial. Like, I wanted to complete the relationship. And she was like, okay, I understand that it's done, so we're done. And then she unfriended me on Facebook, and that was the end. And it made me really sad, you know, because I've had her on my podcast. Like, it's just like was such a wonderful thing. And I didn't, if she was hurt by it, right, or had a different expectation, I wish that she would have talked to me about it, so we could have talked about it together, so we could have ended it in a better way. And instead, it felt like she took it personal, which is, you know, it's fine. It's a personal work. I understand I can sometimes take it personal. I'm not immune to it, but I just wish that there was an opportunity for us to talk about it, and there wasn't. And I don't think we spend enough time really talking about how to end this work in a way that feels supportive for both the coach and the consumer.
Yep, that's actually a piece that I have in like my onboarding process, is how we like what that looks like at the end. And that's one thing too of like, you know, endings are always something we all tiptoe around, and it's kind of awkward. So like, just put it out there right away, like right away, because then you can have a dialogue and you can build a dialogue with your client throughout your journey, and they don't hesitate. Because I mean, there's nothing worse than fearing talking to somebody about the fact that maybe you don't financially have the ability to keep going. Like,
Right.
then they're going to carry shame, and they're going to dread it and worry about talking to you. If you create an open stream of dialogue, then they can come to you and say, this is what's going on, or I'm just ready to be done. And that's
Right.
that. No explanation needed. But that relationship of communication is everything.
Yeah, especially when it's something so intimate, because, you know, maybe business coaching can feel a little bit more removed. But I think when we start moving into like, you know, life coaching or emotional work, you know, like wounds, you know, we're starting to get into more vulnerable things. You know, I think I like to view the ideal ending would be both parties being like, you know, it's starting to feel really complete. I agree, it feels complete.
Yeah.
And then we create a plan together. But that doesn't always happen. Sometimes the consumer feels ready to end, and sometimes the coach feels ready to end. And I just wish that there was more of a dialogue of the how to do that in a way that maintains integrity of the work that was done together.
Totally. And I think that really gives a good kind of further explanation of like ethical business right there. Because it's so much about like shifting the habits, shifting the modes of operation, the way that we function, to be really in the highest good of the people you're interacting with and just the relationship you have, and so it's
Right.
like, especially with I get really kind of nerdy with like, I love systems and strategies. So I love combing through stuff and being like, this doesn't work. No, this could be better. No, no, no. And so it's like, I think that's such a good thing to look at your business from that lens of like, I do this, how does this work? And what's the ripple there?
Yeah.
How does this feel? What would it be like to be a consumer and go through that? How would that feel from that end? And really think about it in multiple perspectives too, not just from the coach perspective, but what would it be like to be sitting in the client seat, and how would that
Yeah.
feel from there too?
Right. Right. Yeah. I have to update my contract because I've been in that place of like examining and thinking about and realizing that my contract didn't reflect so much of the way in which I do work. Like I work very relationally. I work very much mindful of the experience of working with me. And I want every step to reflect that. And I think that that can always do better. And it's confronting sometimes. It can feel really hard when you, get rubbed up with the sense of like, oh, I dropped this, or, I was a part of why this happened. I think shame can get elicited. And I think that this also is one of the reasons why people have a hard time with kind of ethics, because it requires them to really relate to their shame differently.
Totally. And to really be okay with being very uncomfortable and willing to like really look at yourself,
Yeah.
and know that like you're not a bad person. Like you're not a bad person. I think that's such a collective fear we have of like, oh my gosh, if I'm bad, I'm this. So I don't want to look at that because that means I'm bad. And all this stuff comes up. And that we can be a lot of things at once, and it's okay to look at it and to see it for what it is, and then say, okay, now I just do better. I do at the degree of what I'm aware of in this state, and I show up the best I can in that space.
Yeah. 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 Because none of us are bad. I mean, we just sometimes do things that harm, and that's
Yep.
two different things.
Yep. Very different things. Yeah. And it's like, I've been reading the book Until We Reckon, and it's all on transformative and restorative justice. And the one she talks about violence a lot, and like just like our relationship to violence. And the one thing she shares a lot is how like people who do harm are not inherently bad or harmful, like sure they cause harm and whatever, but like they're still human beings that have humanity. And so it's like remembering that just because we might have done something that was unethical or harmful or not the best choice or whatever, doesn't mean that that's us. It's just something we did that now we can repair, we can heal,
Right.
we can reconcile it, and then do
Right.
better.
Yes, exactly. And if we can't get over the shame, then we can't inherently do better. Shame paralyzes us, and it stops us from really thinking about how to do better. It activates our nervous system. We go into flight, fight, freeze. We, fawn. We do all of the things, but actually think about and internalize how we can be better.
Yep.
Yeah.
So much good stuff to work on in that. I feel
I
like
know.
that's very much it's critical work to be doing for yourself, especially if you're supporting other people.
Yeah. So what is next for you? What are you planning? What are you strategizing over there in terms of what you want your sustainability to look like?
Yeah. I'm in a really very creative kind of pseudo sabbatical type of year, in terms of like I'm doing much like what you mentioned, no big launches. I'm not doing anything new in terms of birthing anything new this year, anything like that. And so this year really is just kind of like, a lot of repositioning a little bit. I'm kind of preparing to venture into some new avenues. Next year is going to be my year to write my first book. So I'm going to kind of go into more of that avenue, obviously still doing all my client work, and I support a membership and stuff like that, but just kind of starting to spread some legs in other directions and kind of prepare right now. I've also been starting to work a little bit more in like a teams and organizations and corporate level too.
Cool.
So that's kind of what I'm trying to plant some seeds and get some education behind me to build some frameworks that can also be implemented into more of the corporate setting and more larger company setting, for just kind of a lot like what we're talking about, more ethical, sustainable practice, for organizational structures.
I feel like that's so critical and important at a time when our governments are not going to be holding companies accountable. So
Yep.
we have to,
Yep.
especially, there's nothing like watching like a documentary or like an expose to really think about how much we've been brainwashed to think that like consumers are responsible for protecting the planet when ridiculous percentages of the harm is being created by companies.
Yep. We have a conversation about that all the time, how it's like very hilarious that we've been convinced that all the problems on this planet are our fault and our responsibility to fix.
Yes. Yeah. Like paper fucking straws. I hate paper straws so much. They deteriorate in your mouth. They're stupid. I hate them. And like, that's what's going to save the planet, right? Not the fact that like Coca-Cola and Pepsi create like some astronomical percentage of plastics in the ocean. Like, no, it's the paper straws, right? Like I'm drinking a Starbucks cup that's made out of plastic, but the paper straw is paper, and therefore I'm saving the planet, right? Or like our electricity. It's the electricity we use, Natalie, that's going to save the planet, not the fact that like every large building around me that our corporate offices have the lights on the entire night, even though no one's there. It just, we have to plant the trees, right? Natalie, like we have to plant the trees that like companies are butchering the Amazon.
It's wild. I know. It's wild. It's so, and not to mention the fact that like, recycling, that most of our entire recycling program doesn't even actually exist, and all of our stuff still ends up in a landfill.
There's a billboard that I walk by when I go to my clinic, that has this like, when you recycle, this plastic gets used, in 2 other products, and it's like this huge thing. And then I watch, the John Oliver expose on plastic, and I'm like, oh, actually, the majority of plastics we use goes right. Like, it's just really frustrating. So I'm saying all that to like celebrate the fact that you're expanding your reach and your tentacles into organizations, because ultimately that's where the majority of the change has to happen.
Yeah. And that's it. This conversation right here is exactly what really kind of lit that in me of, it's got to be a bigger reach, because it shouldn't all end up being small independent businesses that are trying to do this stuff. Just like this entire conversation of it's all up to us. And it just doesn't make sense when the majority of the harm on a collective level that's happening isn't happening from us, So it's just like, but also seeing the side effects of that macro level system, and how now it's almost like the micro, small business entrepreneurship is mirroring it. And that's where it's really scary, because then it's like, oh my gosh, are we just micro corps now? Like micro corporations functioning the same way. So it's just trying to flip it as much as we can.
Well, I celebrate you, and really am appreciative of this conversation. And also of the remembrance that your presence carries, that we have so much more autonomy, power, control to change what is around us than we think we do, and that it can be everywhere and it can be wonderful and, like you said, nourishing and sustaining. And I would much rather build a business that I can live my life and thrive on than to make money short term at a long term cost. And I'm so glad that you take a stand for that. And yeah, obviously I'm just like a big fan, and I'm so excited that I get to amplify your voice to the people who are listening. And that I got to be on your podcast.
Yes.
So if you want to hear more of me and Natalie, stay tuned, because I got the amazing opportunity to be on your podcast and continue to talk about this from a slightly different lens.
Yes. Yeah. This has been an absolute blast having these conversations.
It's so good. Thank you so much, Natalie.
Yes. Thank you.